Matchroom. What they've done there is pretty disgusting, I think. His 12th pro fight, he should never have been in there with a guy like that. Now, if you look at other fighters, other world champions who's had loads of success, like Ricky Hatton, Carl Froch, Floyd Mayweather, look who they fought on their 12th professional fight. And that was even after they were being consistently active, having 3-4 fights a year. Now, Josh has not fought since the end of 2019, and they throw him in with that European champion. It's terrible. He's 26-year-old. They should have been building up Josh Kelly and hand-picking his fights, getting him more experience in there, especially after being so inactive with what's happening in 2020. And Josh Kelly could have been one of the biggest names in the world boxing, definitely the biggest name in British boxing. He's so talented, but they've rushed him, and that's what happens in pro boxing. And I think with Matchroom, they've got that many top fighters. It's like, I'll throw him in with this top guy. If he wins, great. If he doesn't win, I've got loads more fighters. It's kind of sink or swim. There's no individual attention there for him. You know, it was terrible. What they've just done there to that 26-year-old lad was terrible. And
that is former British Olympian, 7-time British and European champion, Tony Jeffries, who is very critical of Matchroom for even putting Josh Kelly in there with David Avanesian in the first place. I'm ambivalent as far as Tony Jeffries' candor, because I think there's some truth to it, though ultimately it's not cause for criticism from where I'm sitting.
Here's why.
Josh Kelly, like Tony Jeffries, is an Olympian.
And that's why they matched him tough.
Matching Olympians tough is not a practice that is exclusive to Matchroom. It's not an instance that's exclusive to Josh Kelly. Guillermo Vergandial, Vasil Lomachenko, Clarissa Shields, Katie Taylor.
Tony Yoka, look at him.
Olympic gold medalist Tony Yoka,
France,
with only 8 professional fights under his belt ahead of the match, was put in there with seasoned professional and veteran Christian Hammer. Guy with 32 professional fights under his belt. Guy who proved to be a handful for Tony Yoka.
Tony struggled with him,
but he did make it through. When I hear Tony Jeffries say what he's saying in reference to the matchmaking at Matchroom, in reference to this past weekend's fight between Josh Kelly and David Avanesian, what rings true is that Josh wasn't ready for David Avanesian. We know that because we've already seen the fight. We saw Josh Kelly, so many words, fall apart against David Avanesian. So I don't think that Josh was ready for that fight. However, I won't poo-poo all over Matchroom for matching their guys tough.
They're not the only ones that do it.
Top Rank does it all the time with their Olympians, with their kids that have an Olympic pedigree.
Tony's really mad about is that Josh lost.
Because I don't think that Tony Jeffries would be critical of the matchmaking at Matchroom if Josh Kelly emerged the victor this weekend. If he emerged the victor, Tony Jeffries likely be singing their praises for bringing him along properly. But because Josh lost, he's critical.
How do you reconcile this?
Josh Kelly wasn't ready for David Avanesian, because that's what we saw. Josh Kelly was taken apart by David Avanesian. You can't tell me that you watched that fight and you saw a fighter that was ready to be locking horns with a world-level guy like David Avanesian. You didn't.
No, he wasn't ready.
Josh really wasn't ready for that fight. However, Josh not being ready for that fight is not cause for criticism.
Because Matchroom's not doing anything the Top Rank isn't doing.
Anything that isn't commonplace, anything that isn't tel age in the sport of boxing. When a fighter has a deep Olympic pedigree, if they manage to medal, it's commonplace for that fighter to be moved along a little faster than someone who doesn't have that kind of amateur background. This is commonplace. And where Josh Kelly faltered at the hands of David Avanesian, Olympians that were moved along at a similar rate like Anthony Joshua, they did not falter. So you can't poo-poo all over Matchroom just because the guy that you wanted to win didn't win.
Tony Jeffries is making excuses.
Reality of it all is, in hindsight, Josh Kelly doesn't appear to have been ready for that fight, but you can't fault Matchroom for matching him the way that they did because they can't hold the kid's hand forever. This is commonplace in the sport, and this is a sport where it really is sink or swim. There are some things that only time can tell, some things that only time can reveal. We know now that Josh Kelly was not ready for that fight.
Because we saw it.
Because the fight actually took place, because time actually told the story. Could Josh Kelly have done with one or two lighter touches or one or two more learning fights before the David Avanesian fight? It appears that he could have, though woulda, coulda, shoulda. If my aunt had a dick, she'd be my uncle. When you play that game, when you go into a hypothetical hypothesis after every fighter you like loses a fight, everything starts to make sense. And it's a question of, where do you draw the line?
Where does it end?
Josh Kelly losing this weekend's fight to David Avanesian really isn't cause for criticism. What it is an occupational hazard.
It comes with the territory.
Perhaps Josh wasn't ready for David Avanesian, but that's one of those things that you don't know until you find out. And in this sport, you have to.
You have to put him in those sink or swim situations.
I wonder what Tony Jeffries' solution to this would have been. What, you want to continue to match Josh Kelly against fighters that are overmatched? You have all this regard for Josh Kelly, but no regard for the no-hopers you would have intended to put him in there with?
Would that have been a solution?
It seems to me like what Tony Jeffries is doing is playing favorites. Ultimately, Josh Kelly losing to David Avanesian, as I specified in my weekend recap video, Josh losing to that guy is not cause for criticism. Nobody should be lambasting Josh Kelly for stepping up in competition because, I reiterate, most professional fighters out there aren't fighting guys like David Avanesian in what is only their 11th professional fight. So if Josh lost the fight, nobody should lambast him for it.
But you shouldn't be crying him a river either.
Josh Kelly would have made it through this weekend's fight. Tony Jeffries wouldn't have had nothing to say about it. If anything, he probably would have been singing Matchroom's praises for how they're grooming this young fighter. But because the fighter that he wanted to win didn't win, Tony wants to throw his toys out of the pram.
That's what this is.
Josh Kelly didn't look like a fighter that was ready to be in there with David Avanesian based on how the fight played out. In hindsight, we can say that Josh wasn't ready to be there with a fighter like that. But there are some things that only time can tell, and time in and of itself must be allowed to reveal these truths.
You can't cry about it every time that happens.
In welterweight news, Adrian Broner on Regis Prograis' fight. I don't see that fight next, but I'm gonna fuck him up. He's quoted as saying, maybe not next, Broner said during a post-fight press conference early Sunday morning. I don't see that next. But if it do come next, it don't matter. It don't matter. I'm gonna win. I'm gonna fuck up, buddy. Prograis, like I always tell everybody, and I always tell everybody this, he keeps yelling my name, and he's doing what he's supposed to do, Broner said, When I was coming up, I was calling everybody out. He's only doing what he's supposed to do. But like I always tell him, just keep doing your thing. I wish him nothing but the best. Every time he fights, I hope he wins. But like I said, man, if he gets in the ring with me, I'm gonna fuck him up. Regis Prograis was quoted as saying, I don't think AB is scared of me. I won't say that, Prograis said. He fought Pacquiao, he fought Sean Porter, he fought Marcos Maidana. As a man, I don't think he's scared to fight me. As a businessman, I think he's scared to mess up whatever he has planned. He's not scared of me as a person, but I do think he's scared to get in the ring with me at this point in his career. He doesn't want to fight me now because it's too much of a risk for him. But with Al Heyman involved with both of us now, maybe after the Santiago fight, we get to a point where it's still a risk for him, but a lot of reward. He'll get in the ring if he gets whatever he's asked for. 10 million, 5 million, 3 million. I do think it's still a big fight, one of the biggest at 140, so I get why Broner's doing what he's doing. But I do believe a fight between me and him will definitely happen.
Did he say 140?
Regis Prograis seems to think that this is a weight that Adrian Broner can still make.
It isn't.
In light of what took place ahead of this weekend's Santiago fight, the fact that the contracted weight for the match was changed at the last minute,
welter.
And in unison with the fact that that's really not the first time that's happened. That also happened ahead of the Adrian Granados fight. Adrian Granados had a little bit more notice than Giovanni Santiago did, though all the same. Those were fights where the original contracted weight for the match was 140 pounds. And at the very last minute, it was changed because, in so many words, Adrian Broner couldn't make the fucking weight. Ahead of a Regis Prograis fight, or should I say, that proposition, I really don't imagine that would be billed as a 140-pound contest. I'd sooner believe if it happens, it'd be a welterweight contest.
Think that's a $10 million fight?
I don't. I have nothing against Regis Prograis. I actually relish the opportunity to see Regis in action. I have a high opinion of this fighter. But what I don't think is that it's a big fight the way that he thinks it's a big fight. It's not a big fight because Regis Prograis is not a name often thrown around by casual boxing fans. Only the hardcores who follow the sport closely know the name of Regis Prograis. Now, Adrian Broner, he has some celebrity, though he has celebrity as a fuck-up.
Train wreck.
The paying public doesn't actually want to see Adrian Broner fight.
Broner versus Pacquiao fight did 400,000 buys.
Which is a pretty good buy rate, especially these days when pay-per-views just aren't selling like hotcakes and the pay-per-view model just isn't what it used to be. 400,000 buys, yeah, that's pretty good, but you have to consider that was a Broner versus Pacquiao fight, you understand, with Manny Pacquiao being the real selling point. Anybody that bought that fight was somebody that wanted to see Adrian Broner get his fucking ass kicked by Manny Pacquiao, who's a bigger name than Adrian Broner and a much bigger name than Regis Prograis.
Don't think that Broner versus Prograis sells 400,000 buys.
It won't, because Regis Prograis, for all his ability, he does not yet have the following that either an Adrian Broner has or a Manny Pacquiao. He doesn't have the level of celebrity, the level of notoriety that either of those two fighters have. So if you put Adrian in there with Regis, you know, it ain't gonna do 400,000 pay-per-view buys. I mean, Regis is being rather optimistic in saying that he still thinks it's a big fight.
It isn't.
It's not.
It's not a big fight.
I think that Adrian Broner hurt what selling power he had left well over a year ago in the Pacquiao fight. That was a fight where he didn't fucking do anything. That was a fight where if you wanted to see it, you had to pay to see it. It was pay-per-view, and in that pay-per-view, he didn't fucking do anything.
And what about this weekend's fight?
Or rather, dubious decision was awarded to Adrian Broner this past weekend in the Giovanni Santiago fight. And if I'm being honest, they can get away with it. They do it all the time. They did it to Jackson Marinez, and they did it to Emmanuel Rodriguez. This weekend, they just did it again to Giovanni Santiago. So in that way, they can do that, and they can do that with impunity. But what they can't do is draw in customers with those kinds of practices.
Who the fuck's gonna pay to see Adrian Broner fight?
I'm not taking the piss. I'm being serious. Who the fuck wants to pay to see Adrian Broner fight? I mean, I like Regis. I think he's a solid guy. Elite-level counterpuncher with a very strong punch. Entertaining to watch. But he doesn't have a casual following. More casuals know AB than they know Regis Prograis. But what the casuals know about AB is that they don't want to pay to see him fight.
Maybe if it were AB and Thurman.
You know, because both of those guys, they're showmen. They got big mouths, talk a lot of shit. Can make a real event out of the pressers for the match. Maybe if it were Adrian Broner and Keith Thurman, maybe that's a fight that could garner
some interest,
some attention, but Regis.
What, on pay-per-view?
I think there's some truth to Regis's contention that AB views him as a high-risk, low-reward kind of guy, that he's not necessarily scared of Regis the way that your 5-year-old is scared of the Boogity Man or the dentist. He's not scared of him that way, but he does know that Regis Prograis has the potential to spoil his plans. Adrian Broner likely has a fight that pays out more than a Prograis fight in mind.
Probably.
Maybe that's a Danny Garcia fight. Maybe that's a Thurman fight. Hell, maybe it's an Errol Spence Jr. fight. AB is active due to his money troubles, and fighting Regis Prograis won't solve them. If anything, it'll create them, because Regis could foil his plans. And Regis is not a big name, so fighting him only gets you so much cash. I think Regis Prograis ranks pretty low on Adrian Broner's to-do list, his priority list. I think he ranks pretty low on the proverbial totem pole for Adrian. Not gonna say I don't think the fight happens. It could, still might. But I think that if AB had it his way, you know, he'd probably fight someone else, someone like a Thurman, someone that stands a better chance of helping him get at more money.
That's what he's after.
Than Regis would, given what's going on at 147 pounds. That's a very narrow field, a very shallow pool of options. That's why I still think the fight is a possibility. It's just that Adrian will likely explore other avenues, other options, before deciding to take someone on like Regis, because Regis really is a high-risk, low-reward guy for AB. And finally, per tweet from Michael Benson, Bob Arum was quoted as saying, Loma versus Haney, that's a fight we would certainly consider. That'd be a really good fight. There's a lot of good fights for Loma. Loma can maybe fight Ryan Garcia, or if he wants to go down, maybe Oscar Valdez. That's a great matchup for Loma on Barbershop Conversations. I do think Vasyl Lomachenko versus Devin Haney is a fight that makes sense. I think it makes sense for both guys. I think that Vasyl Lomachenko and his team, having done what they did,
Franchise thing.
petitioning to become franchise champions, that has left some unfinished business between him and Devin Haney. Moreover, there is a growing demand from the fight fans to see Devin Haney fight someone with a pulse, someone who can legitimize him as a champion of some kind, because he is in possession of an alphabet title. It's just that some people out there, not all, but some, they don't think he's earned it.
This would be an opportunity to silence the critics.
I'm certainly not against that fight. I'm not against that proposition, though if I'm being honest, I don't expect the fight to be made. I just don't. Vasyl Lomachenko still is a top-ranked fighter, and until further notice, Devin Haney still is on the Matchroom DAZN side of the street. There are obvious politics involved with a fight like that.
And I don't know how much willingness there is on both sides.
Don't get me wrong, I like the fight. I'd love to see it. I just don't know. How much do the Devin Haney people, how bad do they want that fight? And how bad do the Vasyl Lomachenko people, how bad do they want that fight?
Do they want that fight?
Takes two to tango. Both parties got to be willing to bring their dance shoes. And I don't know how receptive the Devin Haney people and the Vasyl Lomachenko people are to that kind of fight. I like the fight. I just don't expect to see it materialize. And you can fucking forget about Ryan Garcia.
You kidding me?
You're dreaming if you're entertaining that proposition. I'd sooner believe that Ryan takes on Javier Fortuna or Jorge Linares before he fights Vasyl Lomachenko. I mean, a lot of people have quite conveniently written off Vasyl Lomachenko
Quickly.
on the heels of his loss to Teofimo Lopez. But make no mistakes, the people in boxing, the people in the know still know. This guy's a threat. He's still a threat.
At least to Ryan Garcia he is.
Yeah, Bob can propose it. He can propose it till he's blue in the face. And it might seem like a good idea, but what it ain't is a fight that's going to happen.
Oscar Valdez is more likely than that.
If Vasyl Lomachenko, upon his return, were to make the decision to move back down to 130 pounds, well, that's a whole new pool of options right there. You got Oscar Valdez, Jojo Diaz, the winner of Frampton versus Herring.
What about Gervonta Davis?
What about Gervonta Davis? Yeah, he's there, but that fight's no likelier to happen now than it was before.
No formal announcement has been made saying that Loma's going to 130.
That's the thing. They're just bouncing ideas around. What if Vasyl Lomachenko decides to go back down to super featherweight? There are people down there for him to fight. Shakur Stevenson among them. Shakur Stevenson, who actually, very recently, expressed interest in fighting Vasyl Lomachenko.
I don't know how many guys at 135 are in a hurry to fight Loma.
Lopez doesn't want to give him a rematch. I don't know where Devin Haney stands with that proposition. Ryan Garcia, you can fucking forget about it.
Won't happen.
Yeah, guys like Richard Komei, guys like Masayoshi Nakatani, those guys are probably receptive to a Vasyl Lomachenko fight.
But is he receptive to a fight with them?
Given what fights are likelier to happen than not at 135 pounds, could the 130-pound division become a more attractive option for Vasyl Lomachenko than staying at lightweight?
Yeah, maybe.